Hi everybody, welcome back. Episode number 3. Still not sure what to call this. It's not exactly a webinar, not exactly a webisode. If you have any ideas, let me know. We'll get back to you on that. So I thought, because this is Mr. Pineda's last week here, today's his last full day, that I would like to ask him some questions about parenting. Mr. Pineda is really a great guy. He's very responsible. He is hardworking, he's dependable, and he's great with the kids. So I've been curious as to how he was raised. And I thought it might be helpful to a lot of our parents and to me, just figuring out and listening to him talk about some things his parents did right. I know, as a counselor and a teacher for like 19 years, I have seen a lot of parents parenting. I have my own parents. I have a son myself. So I've seen a lot of things that go well for kids and things that don't. I've carried those ideas with me. But I thought today we would take advantage of Mr. Pineda's being here. I'm so impressed with the young man that he is that I thought it would be fun to ask him some questions. So I thought, Mr. Pineda,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Before I go into that, I just want to say thank you for all those kind words you were forced to say.
Never forced.
All right. So I was born and raised in Northern Virginia. I grew up in Fairfax when I was born to about 5 years old, but both of my parents are from the country of El Salvador. Mm-hmm. My two parents, both of them came to this country around the 1980s. And then my sister and I were born, my older sister were born in Fairfax, went to school there for kindergarten, and then I moved to Prince William County for elementary, middle, and high school. So that's kind of where my physical upbringing was, but because I happened to live very close to some of my cousins, aunts, and uncles from my mom's side, I grew up very close to my grandparents, aunts and uncles who were physically close to us, and I had cousins who were close in age to myself. I was the youngest of that whole tier of cousins, so I was a baby. But I grew up very close to them. We interacted with each other very often. After school, we got to see each other very often. But as far as schooling, it was more just my older sister kind of guiding me, since my parents were each working about 2 to 3 jobs each, all the way until high school, and they both still work 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs.
Wow, that is amazing. When your parents came here, did they speak English?
No. So my parents both came here around the 80s, so 1980s. There was a civil war going on in El Salvador. So part of the reason why they wanted to come here was to kind of leave that. But my mom actually had a lot of older siblings who had moved to the United States at that point. And so she's the youngest of 10, or not the youngest, but like third youngest of 10. And so my dad had known my mom. They weren't married. They were just kind of like in a relationship. So my dad wanted to come along after my mom came. So my mom and I think 2 of her sisters came to the country. Then my dad came about a year later. Didn't know any English, so they worked a lot of labor-intensive jobs, very low-skill jobs. I think my mom worked in a lot of cleaning, kind of like houses. She actually still works cleaning a house of a woman that she got when she first arrived in this country. My dad did a lot of also maintenance level work. My dad still does maintenance level work. Both of their English has improved, but I think because my mom was a little bit more involved in like my sister and I's schooling, she practiced her English a little more in her jobs. My dad still speaks English, not as advanced as my mom does, but they both are still able to kind of do beginner intermediate level English.
So you said they worked like 2 to 3 jobs when you were little?
Yes.
Or young? How did you spend a lot of time by yourself? I mean, how are they able to parent you so well and be so hardworking?
Well, this was definitely just what worked in our family. So I had a lot of cousins and friends who also had similar backgrounds as I did. They had working parents, immigrant parents, so different stylists work for different people. But at least in my household, both of my parents worked during the day when my sister and I were in school, but we had older cousins who lived walking distance from our house. So we usually went to their house after school when my parents were still working. And at nighttime, we would see maybe mom and dad. They would be very tired, but we'd see them at home. And so they always really pushed for my sister and I to focus on school and education. And one thing that I really think about is, why? How is it that they have absolutely no knowledge or awareness of the education system in this country, and how are we still motivated to do it? And I think part of it is because both my mom and dad really instilled in my sister and I the ideal of like service and giving back. Regardless if my sister and I didn't have a lot growing up, they always really wanted to make sure that we understood that there were still others who were in need, other people who did have less resources than we did, so to be appreciative, but to also kind of be goal-oriented. And so a lot of that was based off of economic reasons. So they knew that going through the education system in this country, you'd end up getting a better job. So that was kind of like a mini goal. And things changed in like high school because we didn't really know anything. We really had not a lot of knowledge and awareness of what was life after high school. So it really was just to make sure you got to the next point, to the next goal. And luckily my sister and I were really good in school. We didn't have any behavioral issues. But I think it was based off of having a lot of community support based off of like family. So family community support, right?
When you were little, like how did you have to help around the house? How did they instill a sense of responsibility in you?
So I remember mentioning it to you a little earlier in the school year that I knew how to do my own laundry at 5 years old. Which to a lot of my peers, it's bananas for them.
I'm trying to teach my 12-year-old.
Oh, good. It's a new skill sometimes, but it was just out of necessity. I think it was because my mom and dad did maintenance level work, so they knew like the importance of cleaning up after yourself. And so us as kids, we saw it as a chore, but I think because we knew that they weren't always going to be doing it for us. So we had to be independent at a young age. So I could go back to that one example of the laundry. I was 5 years old. I was in first grade at that time, so laundry made no sense to me. But for me to know how to do, we put a little sticker by the dial for washers and dryers for those of us that
okay.
So we had to turn the dial to a certain area where the sticker was.
A sticker. Okay.
So for the washer, I knew blacks and whites had to be separated colors and had to be separated from the whites. So that was already at a young age. But then to know how long for, we had to turn to a certain dial.
Okay.
So that's how I learned. And then, other than that, the academic aspect, I think it was just knowing that my older cousins, unfortunately, who didn't have as strong of parent relationships with them, I saw that they struggled a lot more, so I think I wanted to make sure I was focused in it. But it was tough. I mean, I didn't have a lot of tutoring support. I didn't have a lot of academic support. It was just mostly just my sister and I. My sister did a really good job kind of reinforcing just to do my work.
So she's equally as responsible.
She's much more responsible than I am. She's actually also a school counselor as well. But I give her probably not as much credit. I mean, she went through this whole entire elementary, middle, and high school on her own. She didn't really have as much support as I did. I mean, I at least had her to kind of look up to, and she had my cousins who were older than her, but they weren't as goal-oriented academically or educationally. So I think I was very lucky and very blessed to have her as my first immediate educational mentor.
Were either of you in ESOL program?
So funny that you say that. So Spanish was my first language that I learned. And so I remember being at home and learning English through my sister's homework. So she also learned Spanish first, but I think because she, at a young age, was interacting with our family, cousins, and all that, she spoke English with them. So she was never involved in ESOL or ESL. And neither was I, but I remember I learned English at a younger level than she did because I wanted to do her homework, partly because I wanted to do something with her, and so she would usually give me her math homework and English homework. But in school, I guess I don't really know how the system is as far as kind of identifying who goes with what path, but I guess we were tested to be fine with English level.
The first question is, what is the language spoken at home? What's the first language? And then I think they have assessments for kids, and that's how they determine who maybe goes to ESOL and who doesn't need it.
Gotcha. Spanish is still the language spoken at home to this day. To all of my family members, with the exception of a few aunts and uncles and cousins, everybody, I still speak Spanish with them. And so I think to parents and family members who are multilingual or bilingual or trilingual, I would say keep stressing them to speak in different languages. And I, as a child, I hated speaking Spanish at home. But I think I look back now, and I think that's one of the major reasons why I'm so proud of the language I'm able to speak in my culture, just because I think it really instilled a lot of, I think, pride in my background.
Well, and kids don't understand what an asset it is, so they don't want to speak it with their parents. They don't want to speak it at home, but then when you get older, you realize what an asset it is as far as getting jobs.
Yep, that's right.
And speaking to people.
And I think just realizing, because both my parents had a lot of broken English, they spoke broken English, so I think we had, the Catholic guilt that was instilled in us of making sure that we kind of understood both languages, and I think that really did motivate me and empower me to perfect both English and Spanish, because I knew that it was a struggle to learn a different language at an older age, especially being in this country. English is the dominating language here.
But just having you here speaking Spanish is huge to me, because sometimes parents will have questions and I have to go find somebody who can speak Spanish, but you're right here. So that's been great. You also seem to have some self-motivation, looking up to your sister, looking at your cousin. You seem to have somewhat of a self-awareness. That seems in combination with your parents' great parenting, or they're instilling some expectations of how things are going to happen.
Sure, and I think part of it is also just because of my age. In my immediate family, I'm the youngest, but with my cousins, with at least our group, I'm also the youngest. The person below me is 5 years, and so I was always the little one. I was always having to play catch up, and I think that instilled a huge competitive drive in me, for better or worse. But I look back at it now, and I think that really was the reason why I am self-motivated and why I push myself to go beyond the benchmarks that I do make, and I self-doubt myself a lot for that reason too. But
that can be a driving factor as well,
right? And I think just me being competitive personally, but also professionally, academically, just I don't like staying still. Also figuratively and literally, but it I think helps me kind of keep my work ethic strong, because I know that what I'm doing is not enough. Whether it's because I was the youngest one, or whether it's because I know that there's more that I could or should be doing.
A lot of times, though, the youngest, older people tend to do a lot for the little one. So the little one isn't always the most driven. You seem to have gone beyond that. I mean, you've seeing things differently, being motivated by certain things, and I think that has to do with a lot with your parents and your family. And I think it's just the giving back, and my sister. I mean, again, I don't give her as much praise as I usually should, but she much more self-driven and she's the most bubbliest person I know, and I think just taking just some aspect of her personality and kind of using it for my own, and it is a little hard being the youngest and kind of having to live under that shadow, but I think that also is part of me wanting to be competitive, and just because she's doing it, what more could I do? I don't think your parents spoiled you. No, God, no. Yeah, so. I wish. Well, no, because I think that's one of the things that has contributed to your growth. It's we all have to do certain things. We give back. You don't need more than you need. You don't need to have more than you need. I think that a lot of times we want to give our kids everything. But then they're not as driven to get it for themselves, something like that. Well, part of it is because of the generation I grew up in. I grew up in the 90s, to age myself. Oh, please. Right. But I grew up in a time where I think computers were just being a part of the household, and we didn't have a computer until I was 10 years old, where all my peers were having computers. I was 30. Very nice. So kind of the same. But I think just growing up and then kind of having to compare myself to the other students, I never realized how different I was until the middle school level, because in elementary school, most of the neighborhood that I lived in was similar to my household. When it came time to middle school is when I realized, I'm a little different, not only just because of my culture and my race, but because of my socioeconomic status. And then high school was much more of a bigger divide, because the way the jurisdiction lines kind of went, we had a lot of military families, a lot of families who were upper middle class,
And so, again, I knew that I was different from a lot of my peers. And so it was hard. I think the older I got, the more I realized, like, oh, I guess I'm a little different in different ways than I thought. And it was hard. I mean, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy knowing that I had dial-up internet all the way through elementary, middle, and high school. When kids nowadays, don't understand what that's like. But I think it's comparing apples to oranges. I think it's just kind of reminding your child or whoever kind of growing up in the system is, and just letting them know, like, you're fine how you are. Like, this is how we are as a family unit, and not having to compare them to others.
Do you think that feeling different, it didn't seem to deter you?
No,
or discourage you?
Not in a sense to knock me off my course. I think I was too stubborn to do that. But there were several moments and days and months that I felt discouraged. I think even to this day I still feel discouraged, having to go through graduate school and not really have an idea where it's going, just because neither of my parents went to any educational system in this country. It was all in El Salvador.
Did they get through high school?
My mother went through, I think both my mom and my dad went through high school. My mom, I think, went to what's considered college level over there. But I think in this country, when it translated, it's kind of equivalent to like a high school level kind of level education. And so, excuse me. But it's intriguing to kind of see how that changes after years, because I think nowadays, especially in the region where we're living, in the Northern Virginia area, it's a very high education level. So finding work, finding anything gets a lot more competitive, and it gets tougher. I think for the younger generations kind of growing in this time now, it's everybody now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees or education kind of experiences at different levels, and so it's tough to grow in this generation now.
I think there are a lot of challenges, and we could talk about that another time too.
Right.
All the challenges that kids have today, because I think, a lot of kids are very savvy as far as technology,
Right.
but there are other big pieces that are missing.
Yes.
It's getting out there, talking to people, having some of the experiences you have, coming from a hardworking family, and those things seem to have contributed to your being responsible, being driven, being motivated. So as not to take 10 hours, because I could talk to you all day, what are some of the main things you think your parents did right in raising you?
Oof, loaded question.
I think one, pardon my
Sure.
interruption, is the expectation of, he's old enough to do laundry. He's 6, but I mean, that to me says a lot. But we always think our kids aren't capable, but
kids are smart.
They're very capable.
They're smarter now because they have the means to be able to learn handy things, and not even just technology related. I think just life skills. I think kids nowadays are able to kind of access a lot more information in different tools and channels. But I think with me, my parents, it really goes back to the basics, which is just the idea of service and giving back. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm in the course where I'm at right now, kind of to be a counselor and to give back to communities, underserved communities, underprivileged students, just because I knew what it was like growing up. And I think my parents always reminded me, hey, even if you don't have enough, there are others who still could use them, who have less. And it was a hard reminder when I'm in middle school thinking, well, I don't have anything. Well, I want to play XYZ things, and why can't I? And my parents are also stubborn in the same way that I was. And so it's never going to be an easy conversation, but the earlier that it's done, the quicker the sponge brain that we have as kids can soak it in.
The service piece.
Right.
Yeah, I think we learn a lot about our culture, our community, when we're aware of the things others need.
Right. And giving back doesn't have to mean, taking 5 hours out of the day to go volunteering. It can mean being nice to your family member, or you have a younger brother or sister, just help her out with her homework, or
like your sister did with you.
Right. Financially,
She's
and just in the older that we get, there are now newer ways that we can do it. There are new ways through technology that we can give back. But I really always liked giving back to people or community members that looked and acted and sounded like me.
And now beyond.
And beyond, yes.
The kids love Mr. Potato.
Thank you.
I mean, Pineda. Well, I am so glad that I got a chance to work with you. You know that. I wish you could come back for many more webisodes. If you ever have an idea,
I'll
you can
try.
tell me. I would really, this is weird, but I would love to meet your parents.
Oh, thanks.
And your
Okay.
sister, because I am impressed, and I work with so many kids and so many families. So many parents have questions, and we all want to do a great job raising our kids.
Perfect.
Still taping?
I think so.
Okay.
Small technical glitches, but we'll make it work.
So let your parents know. You can show them this.
I will.
And you can actually, if you get a chance, you could tape your parents
Okay.
telling a little bit about you.
Okay.
And I would love to meet them and your sister.
Okay.
So I know I probably can't go to your graduation because you can only get 1 or 2 tickets. But I know we'll stay in touch.
Just sneak in there somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay.
Of course.
I really appreciate it. If you have any questions for Christian or for me about parenting, or you would like me to interview anybody else, I am happy to. We are all in this together, and I can't wait to share with you. So, thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.